Okay, welcome to part 8 of CSS Noob to Ninja. We're going to get into some fun stuff now and take a look at the latest in CSS, specifically CSS 3. Not too long ago we had to fall back to using images in order to achieve effects like box shadow or applying a shadow to your text, or maybe even setting the background of a container to be a gradient. You always had to cut out little images from Photoshop, or if you wanted rounded corners, it was ridiculous how complicated it was to get rounded corners in a website not too long ago. You had to resort to using these background images or even JavaScript. Now it just takes one or maybe two lines of CSS. So we're going to take a look at the most common things that you'll find using in your applications. It's important to note that as CSS 3 is new, not every browser is going to understand it, but that's okay because let's say the majority of people on the modern browsers, they will see maybe rounded corners for your boxes, but if they happen to be in IE 7 or below, they won't. And you know what? That's okay. The world is not going to end if they see square corners. Okay, 90-degree angles is okay. So feel free to use all of this in your project right now. Just keep that in mind. All right, I've created a blank index.html file which links to style.css. Let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to go and create just something called box. Div with an ID box will do just fine. And within here, let's go ahead and style our box. And I'm going to give a width of 200, height, and you know what? Let's make it higher. A width of 500 pixels and a height of 500 pixels. And a background of gray. If I come back and refresh the page, that's what you get. Okay, so the first one is we want to apply rounded corners. How can we do that? Like I said before, we had to use images, but now we can use some proprietary vendor-specific styling. So if we want to target Mozilla, we would do Moz, and that's going to target Firefox. If we want to target maybe Safari or Chrome, anything that uses the WebKit engine, we would prefix WebKit. So the reason this is, it's a long story, but the official version of border radius is just going to be border radius is value. Okay, but a lot of the browsers wanted to implement this before it was officially released, so to speak. So what they did is they applied their vendor prefix. That way we could use it. So unfortunately this it's a good thing that they did this, but unfortunately, at least right now, we need to do 3 lines of code to achieve one property. But like I said, it's a very good thing they did because they pushed along the web, and now we can use these things. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to do border Moz border radius, and let's set it to 5 pixels. And this is going to target anything in Firefox. So you can see here, I'm in Safari. If I save and refresh the page, you're not going to see anything because we haven't targeted Safari. Why don't I go ahead and open Firefox, and now if I close that Firebug, you can see that Firefox is inheriting those rounded corners. Cool. So if we want to target Safari as well, we need to do WebKit, border radius. It's the same thing, just a different prefix of 5 pixels. And now that receives it as well. So there's no way to target Internet Explorer. That's okay though. But it's a good practice because they're all moving along. I believe Internet Explorer 9 will have support for just standard border radius. So you want to make sure at the very bottom you include the official spec. And that's not going to do anything specific, but in the future when browsers do adopt this, they'll use this one. Okay, pretty neat. So what you'll find is that if you play around with these values, you can do some cool things. So like WebKit, I believe the latest version of Safari 5 does have support for border radius. So if we were to up this to 50 pixels, you can see you can get some pretty extreme curves. Bring it up to 150. Yeah, you can almost get completely circular. Let's change Mozilla and see if it's the exact same thing. And yes, it is. It looks pretty much identical. Okay, so that's border radius. Be sure to keep that in mind. What you might want to do, and is what I do, is I often do something like this, just a 3 pixel, maybe even 2 pixels. So what you can do is save this into a program like Snippets. So I could create a new snippet, any kind of a snippet management tool, and I could do rounded corners. I can save that here. And let's clean that up. And give the name of CSS. And now I can access this anywhere in my project. So there are multiple tools you can use. Just email me at net@tutsplus.com if you'd like some specific options. But now if I want to add this in, I just do the keyboard shortcut, and I can search for rounded corners, and that adds it in for me, though I need to fix that formatting. Okay, so the next one is going to be box shadow. So we can do some pretty cool things by applying shadows to our boxes. So we can do this by doing Moz box shadow, and it's going to accept 3 values. The first one wants to know the X offset, the second one is the Y offset, and the third one is going to be the amount of blur. And I'm sorry, it's going to accept the 4th value too of the color. So let's just keep this at 3 pixels all around in black. So you can see that's what gets added. So it's pushed over to the right 3 pixels, and then it's pushed down 3 pixels worth, and then we have 3 pixels worth of shadow, and then finally the color is black. So if I were to change this to 10 pixels, it's going to be a lot softer. But in general, you'll find you keep it pretty simple. So one thing I find myself doing a lot is like maybe 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 2 pixel, and then lessen the black a bit. That way you just get a very, very subtle shadow, and that's what you want. So if I get rid of that, you can see the difference, apply it back on, and you get just a little bit of depth, and you're free to, play around with this a little bit if you want. See how you can get your optimal angle. But of course, this is not going to work in Safari. We need to add a WebKit prefix as well. So I'll do that and change that to WebKit. Refresh the page, and now we have that in WebKit. Like so. Okay, and as with border radius, we need to go ahead and do the official version as well for when all the browsers implement it. Okay, pretty cool. So there's your box shadow, there's your border radius. Let's do another one, and we can do a text shadow. So if I come back here and I add just a bit of text, and why don't I bring in some lorem text? Okay, and why don't we go ahead and bring in some padding all around, 2 ems, maybe 3 ems. Refresh the page, and there you go. So one thing I want to go over just really quickly while we're at it. Let's say I set the padding to 40 pixels. You can see that now the width of this is greater than 40 pixels. If I were to go into Firefox and I go to View and bring up the Web Developer toolbar that I recommended, and we bring up Display Ruler, if I measure this, you can see that it's now 580 pixels. So what it does is the padding is added on to the width. So 500 plus padding left plus padding right equals 580. So you want to keep that in mind when you add padding to things like this. In this case, if you want to make sure that the width is 500 pixels ultimately, make sure you subtract the padding on the left and right from that value. So we would then bring this down to 420 pixels. And now we're back to 500. Okay, and just for convenience, let's set margin to auto. Okay, so what we want to do here is give it a color of white and then apply a text shadow. Or why don't we give it a color of kind of a bluish gray. There you go, grayish color. What we can do here is do text shadow. Now text shadow we can actually get away without doing a vendor prefix. And the values are going to be the same. But with text shadow, you want to be careful. You don't want to do anything too extreme, something like this. You can kind of see the effect there. That just looks cheesy. So in my opinion, it should be very subtle. I generally use it from more of just kind of an offset. So I'll do 0, then push it down 1 pixel, and then maybe give it 1 pixel's worth of blur. And then let's do something like white. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and change the color. 6. You can kind of play around with it, and you can see the different effects that you can get. Okay. We do white and then a text shadow of black. Okay, and you can see you can kind of get that nice glow. If you wanted to change the blur, you're going to make that a much harder edge. So if we were to switch the blur to 5 pixels, you can kind of see the difference there. So this is especially nice if you have text on top of an image where you need to give the text a little bit of a shadow so that you can read it there. You can take advantage of the text shadow. So let's bring that down to 1 pixel again. And when we go back to Safari, refresh the page, and it's going to work in Safari as well, and Firefox. Once again, it's not going to work in IE, but hopefully pretty soon. Don't worry about that though. IE users don't need to see a shadow if it's not essential. If it is essential, you can do something like conditional tags, which I'll show you shortly, to target IE. Okay, and that's all I'm going to show you in this lesson. In the next one, we are going to take a look at gradients, which is a whole different topic where unfortunately Firefox and WebKit don't get along when it comes to the syntax. So we'll take a look at that one in the next lesson.